It's love. Jesus said that the law and the prophets are summed up in this, that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, that you love others as yourself. And so the Christian religion is all about love, and as we come together as a community, we need to know that it is impossible to love something that is fake. It is impossible to love someone that isn't being themselves, that aren't being themselves. And the reason for that is because you're falling in love with something that they are fundamentally not. And so authenticity and genuineness and sincerity, these are things that are really crucial to love. And so this morning, I wonder if you would just have the courage to be real with me a little bit. And I say with me because I'll be real with you as well. So let's do this. How many of you in here are married? Let's go ahead and just raise your hand. All right, here's what I want you to do. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Keep your hand up if you would say that in the last year, your marriage has been the best it's ever been. Keep it up. That's all right. That's all right. That's good. Thank you for being honest. All right. Everybody, you can put your hands down. Raise your hand if you would say that in the last year, your marriage has been not bad, but not really like great either. Anybody? Being honest. Thank you. How many of you, we'll find out who's courageous now. How many of you would say that in the last year, your marriage has really been struggling? Anybody? Me too. Thanks for being honest. 2016 for me was the year from hell. I mean, David Bowie died, for one. That sucks. 2016 started for me in January. I was thinking about this church that I'd been a part of, that I'd given my blood, sweat, and tears to, that I'd invested all of my emotional energy into, that I had just given so much of myself to. It was a church that I loved, and beyond that, it was a church that I really and truly believed in. And 2016 started out for me thinking that even though this church wasn't even 2 years old yet, that it was going to fail. It was going to fall apart. And over the next few months, things happened, and I remember on May 24th, between 8:45 and 9 p.m., I gave my resignation because I just couldn't be a part of what was going on. And for me, that was like pulling the rug out from under me. I didn't sleep that night, I remember. And I remember the next morning, and my heart is kind of in shambles a little bit, a lot of it. And not just mine, but my wife and my kids. I had to explain to my daughter, this was a Saturday night that this happened, I had to explain to her why we weren't going to church that morning. And I remember her asking me, why do churches break? You just don't want your 4-year-old to have that question. And even though I knew that we were struggling emotionally, one of the things that I do just in reaction to that, and I think just maybe as men, maybe other men in here can relate to this, I step up and I said, to myself, I said, we're going to get through this, and I'm going to lead my family through this. And I knew that, here's the thing, when things are just thrown up into the air, when your life that was stable has all of a sudden become chaos, all you want is to just reach for something that gives you security. Like you just want something that is sure. And for me, what that was I knew that we were hurting emotionally, but I knew that pretty soon I was without a job, and so pretty soon we'd be hurting financially as well. And, luckily, and this was not luck, it was God's plan, but that I was, before I was a pastor, I was a physical therapist assistant. I still had my license in Michigan, though not in Ohio. And I called my former employer, and I said, hey, I heard you guys have a job. Is that true? She said, yeah, we have a job opening. It's in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I was like, oh, well, I live in Toledo. We just bought this house. My wife's not going to move, even if we could just sell our house. And so I said, do you have anything closer? No. So then she said, Josh, we've missed you. We really liked you, and we're really desperate in Kalamazoo. So why don't you go stay there, stay in Kalamazoo, and we'll put you up in a hotel, and you can come home on the weekends. And I thought, well, that's money, so got to take money. So I said, okay, all right, fine. So I remember going to my wife, and I remember saying this. I know that this is the worst time for me to leave. That this is the worst time for me not to be able to be present emotionally. But we need some security here. And we're just going to get through this. We're going to get through this. We've got to just get through these 2 weeks, they had said. They'd give me 2 weeks. Well, 2 weeks turned into 3 months. And somewhere along the line, I had said, hey, this is too much. I'm away from my family too much. And they said, well, why don't you commute? And I was like, commute? Like 5 hours in the car total? That sucks. And they're like, well, why don't you just work 6 hours, and then you can commute 5, and we'll pay you for everything. And I was like, well, I can't turn down money right now. So for 2.5 or 3 months, I had been commuting, and when I'd get home, I'd get home at like 6, but I was just wiped out. And at the same time, Steve and Charlie and I were thinking about just kind of gathering people that were kind of dispersed and just like seeing, okay, is this something that God wants? Is there like another church here, another group? And I got so excited about that because to me what that meant is we can have our old life back. Maybe we can just make this, we'll just get through this year and it'll be like nothing ever happened. And maybe starting this new church, maybe what that'll do is we'll get everything that we've lost. And so I poured my time and energy into this, and I just kept saying, we just got to get through this period of time because this is what the church needs right now. We just need to get through this period of time. And I remember like just saying to my wife, hey, I know things are hard right now, but this is what is needed of me. This is what is required of me to get this thing going. And if we can just get through this, then maybe we can get back everything. And over the course of however many months that was, something changed. And I don't remember what we were fighting about, but I remember having this fight, and it was one of those fights. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table, and I'm a hopeless romantic, so I'm like, we're together, and we're together forever. And I remember sitting at this kitchen table, and I can't even remember what she said, but she said something that just hurt me so much that I stood up and I went and I grabbed my bag and I went into the car. And as I'm walking out the door, I'm thinking, I'm not coming back tonight. This isn't a good place for me. I'm not coming back. And I just started driving, and I don't even know, where was I even going? And I remember getting to Detroit and Hill. It's kind of a wonky intersection there. And I remember I had the music off, and I was just like gripping the steering wheel angrily, like, why is this red light here? Taking all my anger out. Have you ever done that? Like, freaking red light. It's not the red light's fault. Anyway. I remember God just spoke in this really small, gentle voice, and he just said, what are you doing? And I flashed back at him. What am I doing? You saw what happened. Like, what am I doing? Of course, I'm leaving. I'm out. I'm not going back because that's not a great place for me. This is hard for me to go back. There's no way I'm going back, God. And you saw what happened. You saw what she said to me, and now I'm going. How dare you ask me? What happened? And I remember he just said, "What are you doing?" So my response to that was, "Okay, fine. I'll go back. I'm going back. I'm turning around right now, God. Turning around right now. But I just want you to know that I'm just going to go and I'm just going to get through this." And the second I said that, I'm just going to get through this, I realized that I had been saying that over and over and over and over for months. I'm just going to get through this. And I realized that in an effort to hold things together, in an effort to be a man and to hold this relationship and this family and to make sure that it doesn't fall apart anymore, I had just gotten through so many seasons, and I had skipped over and ignored so many things that needed to be addressed. And the irony was that I was holding things together, and as I'm holding together, it's like a sieve that just fell apart. And I remember learning this lesson in this time, that it is entirely possible to have my focus and my mindset be on defense, making sure that this marriage doesn't fall apart, like defending it from the different things that could make it fall apart, like holding it all together. I could play defense all I wanted. But when you do that for too long, you neglect to play offense. You don't grow together as a couple. You just continue to fall apart. It's like the law of entropy. And this is what I learned, that the question, how do I fail, is so different than the question, how do I succeed? The question, how do I make sure that these things stay together and everything's just okay, is very different than the question, how do I grow in love for my wife? And so part of me is making a confession this morning. In the last year, I'm in that last group. And, we had this discussion this past week with my wife, and luckily we both kind of agreed that we're kind of like in the best spot that maybe we've ever been. But the reason that we got there is because I shifted my focus. I said, I'm not holding things together anymore. I'm pursuing you now. I shifted from defense to offense. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about this morning. And we're going to be in the Song of Solomon, chapter 8. If you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and pull them out. I realized that I needed to start this message this way today because what she says about love in this chapter that we're going to see is so different than the thing that I've heard my entire life growing up in church, 28 years. It's so different. And it's different in that it's just a subtle focus shift, just a subtle shift of perspective. And I realized that I had been operating, here's my confession, that I've been operating under this defensive marriage policy in my own brain. Like, I'm just going to hold things together. But the love that she's talking about is so different. Because here's the thing, when you have a defensive posture in marriage, when you're asking the question, how do things fail? How does this fall apart? How do I keep this all together? When that's your posture, your goal becomes not falling it apart. Like, success is defined by you staying together. And so what that produces is marriages that last, marriages that are long, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee marriages that are happy. It doesn't necessarily guarantee joy and peace and love. But when you can make this shift, when you can shift from a defensive to an offensive posture in your marriage, you're going to get longevity because you're constantly growing closer and closer together. Your souls are becoming more and more one. And you're going to get longevity because here's the thing, nothing's going to stop that. But you also get joy in this one. And so here's what I want to do today. We're going to look at this passage, and what we're going to see is kind of the big idea, what we've been talking about a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about that. But then we're going to look at 3 symptoms of a defensive marriage, 3 attitudes that you can have that will show you, that help you diagnose if you're thinking about marriage defensively instead of offensively. And then we're going to end with a ceremony. We're going to end with a ceremony. And I'm super excited for that. So we're going to go through this, but keep that in your head. We're going to have a ceremony later. Okay, so we're going to start in verse 8. And, we're going to kind of camp out in verses 6 and 7. But what I want to show you, it's important to me that we kind of walk through the scriptures just because it says it better. I mean, just frankly, you're going to get more out of this than you would if I just came up here and talked. So let's start in verse 1. And she says this, "Oh, that you were like a brother to me, who nursed at my mother's breasts." Let's just stop there for a second. Ladies, if you're like trying to have an intimate conversation with your husband, if you're trying to have like married time, don't bring his mom into it. Don't follow this advice. Like, maybe just don't quote this one. That'll kind of just ruin things. Anyway, she continues, "If I found you outside, I would kiss you, and none would despise me. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, she who used to teach me. I would give you spiced wine to drink, the juice of my pomegranate." So Steve had kind of explained this last week, that in the ancient Near East, this was kind of taboo for lovers to express affection publicly. You weren't allowed to kiss or hug or put your arm around her or hold hands. But if you were in a family, like if you were a brother or sister, then it was fine. And so what she's saying is, I kind of wish for a second that we were related, because then when I was in public and I saw you, I could run to you and I could kiss you, because that's the only thing that I want. And we have this social taboo, so I just kind of want to get around it a little bit. Oh yeah, he's my brother, don't worry. That's a little weird, 3,000 years later, but that's the truth back then. Then she continues, she said this in verse 3. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. If you've been following along with us, you know that she said this before. She said this actually a couple times in the first couple chapters before they got married. And so what we know is that, they talk a lot about how they had saved themselves for marriage. And so if they're saying his left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me, before they were married, we know that what was happening was cuddling. They're cuddling a little bit. And what's so cool about this is that in this passage, by this time, their relationship has aged. They're empty nesters. They're a little older. And they're still cuddling. We went to this. I think it's awesome. We went to this conference in Queens, New York. If you've been at the emotionally healthy relationships course that we've been doing every Wednesday night, Pete and Jerry. They've kind of talked. We showed videos of them, and this is kind of talk. The course is about how to love other people well, specifically in communicating. So we went to this conference just to figure out how to lead those courses a little bit better. And when we got there, the conference had already been going on for 2 days, but those 2 days were just for married couples, right? So when we get there, the place is buzzing, and everybody's just kind of talking, and they're laughing, and they're joking, and it seems like everybody has this inside joke, and we're like, what is going on here? So I talked to some people, and what I learned was that the day before, Pete and Jerry had said, hey, we found this thing that we do in our marriage. It really works really well, and we're going to ask you to do it. And they said, what we do is every night we spend 20 minutes cuddling skin to skin. And everybody thought that was the funniest thing in the entire world. You would spend 20 minutes cuddling skin to skin. And so it was just this running joke that was kind of going on. But one of the things that I realized is that they were, for them, that's how they connected. Not just physically, but emotionally. And 20 minutes skin to skin. And, it might be inappropriate for a pastor to tell you, if you've tried it or not. But a friend of mine, he said it was great. So you're welcome, guys. One suggestion. That's the thing you're going to remember today now. Anyway, verse 5, she says this. Who is that coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Under the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she who bore you was in labor. Why does she keep bringing the moms into this? What's this about, lady? Do you know how to do this? Do you know how to talk? I don't think so. Here's what's going on. Back then, it was considered sexy, for lack of a better term, to be, there's a standard of beauty, right? And so it was considered sexy to be, pale, because that means that you had enough money that you didn't have to go out and work. And so if you had lighter skin, it was considered attractive. It was hot. And another thing is fertility. Something that was really important back then is the ability to give you children. And so she keeps bringing the moms into it because what she's saying is, hey, my mom was able to have a lot of kids, and your mom was able to have some kids. She's kind of saying hey, I'm attractive still. I'm attractive, and I can still do this. And so 3,500 years later, it's well, that's weird talking about your mom, but that's what it means. We're going to camp out in the next 2 verses here. I'm just going to read them. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench it, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. I read this verse this week, and I realized that what she is talking about is so different than what I was told growing up, going to church for the 28 years that I've done that. Because here's the thing, if you ask people who have been in the church and maybe have left, and I have a bunch of friends like this, so in preparation for this series, I actually asked them, hey, what has the church taught you about love? What has the church taught you about, when you were growing up, about marriage? And they all gave me one of 2 answers. Don't have sex before you're married, and don't get a divorce once you are married. 2 rules. When love is this huge, amazing, beautiful thing, the thing that we've been successful at getting people to understand is 2 rules. It just blows my mind. And here's the thing. When that is kind of the focus, when you kind of grow up in that, for her to say, love is strong as death, Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are the flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. When she says that, it's like, hold on, this is different. This isn't like hold things together. Make sure that things are not going to fall apart. Don't have sex before you're married. Don't get divorced once you are married. Make sure that this doesn't fail. Is very different than what she's talking about. She's describing a love that is going out and getting it. She's describing a love that is pursuing and passionate. She's describing a love that looks at the other person and says, I want more of you. And notice the imagery she uses. She says it's flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. This has been kind of a poetic image that she's used before, and that people who talk about love use this imagery a lot, that love is like a fire. And so we talked about a couple weeks ago that maybe you're here and you have like a spark. And like you're kind of in love with somebody, and maybe they don't even know it yet, or maybe they do know it, and you're just kind of in the beginnings of what love is. But what a spark does, because it's fire, it wants to grow. It wants to move from a spark to a flame. And maybe you're here and you've got a flame, like maybe you're engaged, maybe you've been dating for a long time, maybe you are in love, but love doesn't want to stop there. Love always wants more. Love is like a fire. It wants to move from a flame into a fire, and from a fire into like a burning, blazing volcano. That's what love wants to do. Love is always pushing. Love is always wanting more. And here's the thing, when your attitude about marriage is defensive and it's all about not failing, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, we got to know what not to do. Like, that's important. But here's the thing, don't miss this. Don't miss the idea that love wants more. And that love always wants you to be closer. That love wants more oneness and unity, because that's where the joy is. If you focus on this, you might get a long marriage. I was a physical therapist. Let me just tell you this. I was a physical therapist assistant before I was a pastor, and I worked in a nursing home, and I would see all of these couples, right? And they were so hilarious. But you could always tell the couples that had a defensive marriage versus the couples who had an offensive marriage for years, right? Because the couples who had a defensive marriage, usually it's like an older lady, because guys always die first. Just, there's a little bit of hope this morning. So the ladies they're always like, yeah, I mean, he was nice. Yeah, I mean, like, he provided. It was good. But when you ask a lady who had a husband and who had a marriage that was pursuing her, that was letting love grow, she always talked about it like this. Oh, I wish you could have met my husband. I wish that he was still around. I miss him. Like, oh, he was just so good to me. There's a huge difference at the end of the line between a marriage that is focused on just making sure it's going to be okay and a marriage that is constantly and consistently pursuing the soul of the other person. So that's kind of the standard. That's what success looks like in marriage. It doesn't look like just holding it together. It looks like continuing to grow closer and closer. And so let's talk about like kind of three common ways or three symptoms of a defensive marriage so that you can know if maybe you need to make a shift. The first one, I call this a checklist marriage. You have a checklist marriage. This is the type of marriage in which you do a lot for each other. And so maybe you mow the lawn and she does the dishes. Check, I love you. Maybe you take the kids so that she can go hang out with her friends one night. Check, I love you. Maybe you clean up. Maybe your job is to do the laundry and her job is to fold the laundry. Check, I love you. And maybe you provide and that's what you do. Check, I love you. And here's the problem with that. It's so easy for us to take care of each other's surface needs and never connect on a deeper level. It is so easy to check things off instead of actually having a deep emotional connection. And here's the other problem with that. I know that you're all here today, and I know that there's something true about all of you, and it's that you're human. You're human. And as humans, you're made in the image of God. Now, what we believe about God is that he exists in Trinity. He exists in community. And the nature of the relationship that God has is one in which the Father is constantly sending love to the Son, who sends love to the Holy Spirit, who sends it back to the Father, who sends peace to the Spirit, who sends peace to the Son, who sends it back to the Father, who sends joy to the Son, who sends joy to the Spirit. And they're constantly passing around love, joy, peace, belonging, purpose. And that is so different than passing around chores. That is so different than passing around duties. Can you see how there is something deeper about a relationship than maybe what a checklist marriage would be experiencing? There is something deeper. And here's the thing. Here's what I believe. I believe that love wants more. And so that if you have love for somebody else, what that means is that you want more of your spouse. How many of you have upgraded your TV in the last year or two? You know, you got like a bigger, flatter, bigger, better picture. Mm-hmm. Yeah, how many of you have done a home improvement project in the last year or two? Yeah, right? How many of you want a new car? Mm-hmm. All right. Here's what I want to know. Here's the question that we need to ask ourselves. Why are we allowed to want more of those things and we settle for a checklist marriage? Like, why do we want more in literally every area of our life, but in marriage, we settle? What's up with that? Here's what I believe. Love is like a fire. Love wants to grow. That's a checklist marriage. The next one is a problemless marriage. Problemless, as in it has no problems. This is my favorite because when couples like this come into for like marriage counseling, it's like the easiest to identify. Because here's what happens. Usually it's the girl. She'll say, "Oh man, I'm just so unhappy. This is what's going on. This is what's going on." And the guy is sitting there like, "Oh, you guys went with the gray here, huh? That's cool. That's cool. I saw that football game the other day. Did you see that game? It was pretty good." And what's happening is he's avoiding the problems. He's refusing to look and see what actually is going on. And this is done in the spirit of like, if we don't have any problems, then we're doing good. The goal of a problemless marriage is to not have any issues. And usually this comes from like a fear of like, oh man, these issues are more scary and I don't want to deal with them and I don't really, like they just make me nervous. And so what we do is we cover up and we ignore and we hide, all the while the problems fester and they get worse. This can also be motivated by arrogance. It's just like the need for to have other people perceive you as good. And so in church, the place where we should be the most authentic, the place where we should be the most real, we pretend like we don't have any issues. We pretend and don't bring any issues up because I don't want other people to see. It comes from arrogance. And here's the thing that you need to realize, that if you have a problemless marriage, I think we can kind of all agree that letting issues stay only makes them worse. How many of you have ever forgot to like take out the trash? Anybody? Like just any time in your life? Come on, that's everybody. Liars. Forgot to take out the trash last week, and I have 2 kids under, they're still in diapers. And I didn't go in the back door of my house because I'd have to walk past the trash can. It stunk so bad. And here's the thing, we take the trash out every week because we know that if you don't deal with that problem with the trash, it's going to get worse. But when it comes to our marriages, so often we can be like, oh, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. Nope, ignore it. I don't want to talk about that. I think we can all agree that when we let problems go, they only get worse. And so here's the thing. I believe that there is a better marriage out there for you, that your marriage can be better than that. And don't you want more? Like, don't you want more of your spouse? Don't you want a better relationship? Why is it that we want better for our house, or that we want better for our cars, or we want better for our finances, but for some reason with marriage, it just becomes, that's okay, it's good enough. Which leads me to the last symptom of a defensive marriage, a marriage that is focused on holding things together instead of growing deeply and more in love with the other person. This is a marriage that settles. A marriage that settles. This is not in the scripture, this is just my own opinion. But I think that the greatest enemy to marriages is the attitude that this is good enough. And I think that because love doesn't act like that. Love always wants more. Love wants to grow. Love wants to proceed. It wants to pursue. It wants to keep going. It wants more oneness. And when we have this attitude of this is fine, this is good enough, I think we have to ask ourselves, like, are we ignoring love? Are we avoiding it? Like, are we trying to shut it down? And why? And usually it's because connecting on a deeper level usually requires some humility. It usually requires some vulnerability. It usually requires something that's kind of hard for us, and so it's just so easy for us to say, I don't want to do that, this is good enough. But this is good enough doesn't work for anything else in our lives. We constantly, because we're human, we want more. And so the question is like, don't you want more for your marriage? Like, don't you want more for your relationship? Those are three attitudes or three symptoms of a defensive marriage, a marriage that is holding things together instead of growing closer and closer together. I wonder if you're here today and you're just kind of feeling that. Like, yeah, I want more. Can you remember when you fell in love? Can you remember when you first met? Can you remember when you decided, I'm going to marry this girl? Can you remember when he asked? The attitude, the feelings of your heart in that moment where it was all them. Like you just wanted them so bad. Like all you wanted was oneness. You wanted love was acting and moving in your soul, and your God himself was pushing your souls together. And it's so easy to lose that. It's so easy to have a defensive marriage because it's easy. Because when all you have to do is check a couple boxes and then that's your relationship and that's fine. Or when, we don't have any problems. Then that means all the time and energy that it takes to actually love somebody, you can invest in other things that you actually want to do. You can watch football with that. You can hang out with the girls with that time and energy. You can have time and energy to do what you want to do. And so what we do is we choose to have a defensive marriage instead of growing in our marriages because it's just easy. So we're going to end today with a ceremony because I wonder if you're feeling that. I wonder if you're feeling like you want more. Even those who raised their hand and said that, yeah, in this past year, this marriage has been great. Why is it like, okay, that's okay. Yeah, that was great. We're just gonna move on now. Don't you want more? Don't you want it to keep going well? And if you're here today and you raised your hand and it was like, yeah, my marriage is like, okay, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't really good either. Like, why don't we want more? And so we're gonna end with this ceremony. I'm gonna bring Charlie up and he's gonna kind of shade for a little bit. There's this really obscure verse in Exodus, and I want to read it to you because it's just kind of interesting. It's in chapter 20, and I'm just going to read it. It's not going to be on the screen, but I want you to listen. It's actually chapter 21. It's talking about Hebrew slaves, and he says this, when you buy a Hebrew slave, and he shall serve for 6 years, and on the seventh he shall go free for nothing. And it's this rule that God is upending the evils of slavery, even way back in the day, saying you're going to set him free for nothing. It says this, if he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons and daughters, the wife and the children shall be her master's. And he shall not go out alone. So here's the thing that God's saying. He's saying that if your master gave you a spouse and you had a family, then technically going free, they're not really yours because you were a slave. There's so much going on here, like beneath the surface. Number one, like slavery is always evil, but there's something deeper that's being signified here. When we choose to have a defensive marriage, it is so easy to say check, 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 or no problems, and I'm going to go free now. But the problem is that when you choose to go free, when you choose to just focus on keeping it all together, when you make that easy decision, you end up leaving your wife and kids. You end up leaving your spouse. And in the name of freedom, you let your marriage fall apart. But God made a provision. He knew that we needed something deeper. And he says this, but if the slave plainly says, I love my master, I love my wife and my children, I will not go free. Then the master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he will be his slave forever. This guy has made this decision in love to not accept the status quo, to never settle. And in courage, he said to his master, I don't want to go free. I love my wife. I love my kids. I'm staying with them. And instead of making life how I want it, I want to make life how they want it. I want to give myself to them. I want oneness. I want more. So this guy has love and courage. If you're a guy here today and you're married, can you raise your hand real quick? Keep it raised. We're going to go through a ceremony right now. This is going to be super fun. Here's what I want you to do. Take this hand, and if your wife is sitting next to you, why don't you grab her hand? Yep. we're raising up passionate disciples who are loving sacrificially. That's our mission. And I want to ask if you would help us accomplish this today. We're going to love more. We're going to take this next step, and we're going to do it together. And so if you're here and you're a guy and you're holding your wife's hand, what I want you to do is just go ahead and bow your heads. We're going to pray. And I want you to put your head on her head, just because it's a sign of love. And I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to ask you to pray out loud for your wife. And it's not scary. I'm going to give you the words to say. Here's what you're going to say. God, I love you. Go ahead. I love this woman. I will not go free. If you did that, I'm going to ask you to stand up. We're all going to do it together. It's not awkward. Come on. We're all standing up. All the guys, all the married guys in the room, can you stand up? The passage says to bring them to God. There's a lot of symbolism in coming down to the altar. So what I've got here is I've got a tin full of awls. An awl is just an instrument that they would use to pierce leather or wood. It's very sharp. It's kind of like a nail. And we're not going to pierce your ears, I promise. So don't worry about that. But here's what I want you to do. Will you come forward and grab an awl? Go ahead. Just everybody come on. Just line up. And what this all symbolizes is a commitment to no longer live in defense, but to go on offense. To pursue your wife and kids. To make your marriage a marriage in which you are going and getting it instead of settling for the status quo. What this all symbolizes is your love that refuses to continue to live in the status quo. This all symbolizes your courage. You can take a seat once you get back. This all symbolizes your courage in taking the next step, taking love and making it into action. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home with this thing. And holding your wife's hand, I want you to go to your bedroom. I want you to take this awl. I want you to smack it right in the doorpost. I'm 100% serious. And I want you to do this while you're holding her hand, because I want you to have this reminder in your doorpost when you go in and when you go out that this marriage is going to be one of offense. It's going to be one of pursuit, that will never settle for the status quo.